Welcome back to the Your Health television program hosted by the Monterey County Health Department. I'm Emily Sciolto, your host today, and just about every third Monday of each month. So let's get right back into it. I'd like to introduce my third and final guest, Miss Sherrie Collins. Sherrie is the new Emergency Services Manager at the Monterey County Office of Emergency Services. Welcome, Sherrie, and thanks again for joining us.
Oh, it's so exciting to be here. It's exciting to be part of Monterey County.
So we were just talking before the break that you're middle of June. Sherrie started with us, and so I want to kind of continue the discussion. And just mention to folks, if they just tuned in, that we've been talking about preparedness, individual preparedness, community preparedness, how volunteer agencies work together, public, private sector, nonprofit agencies work together to help ensure that folks get what they need during the time of a disaster. But I'd like to know now a little bit more about our first responders. So how do folks like police and fire, EMS, that's emergency medical services, and other first responders, how do they prepare?
Well, actually our public safety agencies are probably always preparing and always training and exercising, for an emergency or a large catastrophic disaster. What's happened in the last decade since 9/11 is that the federal government has, brought forward a number of grant opportunities that really allows those agencies to train and to exercise together. So we spend a lot of time cooperatively, instead of all these agencies, police training and exercising by themselves, and fire training and exercising by themselves, and the emergency medical folks training and exercise. What the real emphasis has been since 9/11 is to really make sure that we have interoperability. So law enforcement can talk to fire, can talk to EMS, can talk to public works, can talk to executive leadership of the government, to the Office of Emergency Services, so that we have that both communication interoperability, as well as also the ability to work together. So it's not only just communication, but just operationally that we're interoperable. Does that make sense?
It
so
does.
The only way to ensure that, not only is planning, and I think Sydney did an excellent job kind of telling you about some of the catastrophic planning that's going on, but to take those plans and make them living documents. And so the way we do that is we exercise them. So we take our public safety agencies and we test them. We give them a scenario. We give them an earthquake. We give them the shakeout scenario that'll happen in October. And actually, we're having an exercise this Friday. And so we'll test them, and we'll stress them out a little bit, and we'll ask them to demonstrate their proficiency and their capabilities in a number of different areas. And then we evaluate that. And from that, we develop what we call an after-action review. So we look at how well we performed, how well we did, where our gaps are, and from there we develop an improvement plan. And it's really that improvement plan then drives where we need to train more, where we need to exercise more, where we need to come back to the plans, and maybe relook at those plans and rewrite those plans to make sure that we're always in that state of readiness for public safety.
That absolutely makes sense, and it's not not as easy as just saying, oh, these folks work together. Sometimes we need to create a structure, some sort of foundation for people to work together, and that's largely what the plan is. And not only that, once the plan's written, it's not like, okay, cool, check it off the list, we're done with that. It's it's nice to know, it's comforting to know as a community member that these things are tested, and we see where we fall short, we see where we succeed, there's a plan, and it's evaluated, and then there's correctional sort of actions that are taken.
Right, it's that continuous improvement. Sometimes I refer to it as the circle of life. We're just continuously growing, getting better, so that we can provide that protection to the community.
Excellent. So how does government leadership then come together during and after an emergency? Like what is their role? What is government's role?
The role of government, executive government, both our elected officials, our executive leadership, both at the city, local government, county government, state, federal government, they come together in what we call the emergency operations centers. And there's various levels of operations centers. There's local, so at your local community, your city, whether it's a city of Monterey, Marina, Seaside, Salinas, they would have their own city emergency operations center. The county, we organize the county, what we call the operational area operations center. Then there's a regional state EOCs, and then there's the state EOCs. And so we all coordinate all needs. So what's happening at the scene of the disaster emergency, the needs of those first responders that we just talked about, what they need to provide to stabilize the incident, to save lives, to protect the citizens, all of those resource needs. Now it could be, for debris removal, it could be dump trucks and front loaders. For fire, it could be ambulances and rescue vehicles and additional, heavy rescue equipment for collapsed buildings. For police, it could be additional police officers from all over the state. So how do we bring those additional resources, additional people and equipment and tools to solve the problem of this disaster? Well, the way we do it is through these coordination centers. And so that kind of serves as, the hub for all those resources to come in, and then we request them from other counties. We request them for the state, and then the state has actually the ability through mutual aid to request from other states. So it's a very coordinated effort. The other thing that the Emergency Operations Center for Government Leadership is so that they have a clear operating picture of what's happening in the field. And real important for especially our elected officials to know what is actually happening out there and what do they need to do in terms of providing for their constituents and stuff. So we really maintain a clear picture of what's happening so that we know what resources and we can think ahead. It's kind of thinking strategically of, what's happening now and what do we need tomorrow, what do we need 72 hours from today. So that's the purpose of our Emergency Operations Center. It's made up of many, many people, and again, all of your government leadership will be there.
And also, not only many people, but many defined roles. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that excites me, if anyone else finds this exciting. I certainly do.
I do too.
That's the thing that excites me about the EOC and about just the structure in general for responding on the multiple levels that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. It's because it comes together so quickly, and there's no real, well, maybe there is one or two here and there, but there's no major delays or questions as to who's doing this or who's doing that, what role. There's defined roles. Folks know what their role is, and it all happens, and it's very cohesive, and it happens very fast.
Yeah, but the reason that happens is because we train and we exercise. If I were to bring those 70 people together in a room and say, okay, here's your problem, solve it. Here's this disaster, and fix it. That probably wouldn't happen. But it's because those people come together routinely, quarterly, yearly, biannually, and we know each other and we work together, that we really understand what my role and function is when I come into the EOC. I know what it is that I need to do, so that when we are problem solving, and that's really what you're doing, is trying to, okay, here we have these needs, and where can I find those? It's really creative thinking on a lot of people's parts. We can do that really quickly, and like you say, it looks effortlessly.
And it's great too that you mentioned earlier. There's plans, and then there's exercises and drills testing those plans, and then there's evaluations, and then after actions. So pretty much everything that we know today and that we're doing today is a learning experience that has come from a large disaster emergency.
That's exactly right. We call them lessons learned, and so will we make mistakes? Will we stumble? Absolutely, we will. Because you can't foresee everything. No. But the idea is that you build on that, and you get better every single time. And so we don't rely on the lessons learned here in Monterey County because you knock on wood, we don't have a lot of disasters. But what we do is we look at our shared communities, and we look throughout the country, and we evaluate their lessons learned. And what can I take away? What can I take away from the tornadoes that occurred in the Midwest and South? this past year? What are the lessons learned from there that I can apply to Monterey County? And you say, well, this isn't Tornado Alley, but there's still things there. Maybe it's debris. You know, Cindy talked about debris removal. I'm kind of hitting on that, but you know, we can draw from that. Mass care. You know, what are the lessons learned from mass care that I can look at what we're doing here in Monterey County, and the Office of Emergency Services can look at that and do better at planning.
That's excellent. So after things have kind of happened in the aftermath of a disaster, our local and county government, needless to say, can be a little overwhelmed. How can we count, other than things you mentioned, how can we count on our local leadership to be there? What steps have been taken to prepare our leaders? You mentioned training.
And we do a lot with our executive leadership and elected officials to train them, just like we do the first responders. We bring them into the exercises so they clearly understand what their roles and responsibilities are. And then, you know, it's also part of what I call the continuity of operations, continuity of government, because one of the things that can impact in a disaster is the foundation of your government can be damaged as well. So we could have structures damaged, we could lose vital records of local county government. So how do we recover from that? And the federal government really asks every level of organization and government to have some kind of continuity plan. And Monterey County does. We have a continuity of operations, continuity of government plan, so that, you know, every citizen can be assured that during a disaster, the government will still be there for them. And those essential, vital functions of government, whether it's local government or county government, will be maintained. Now, maybe not at maybe the same level of service, but they'll be there, the things that need to be there to serve the citizens. So if you look at what we talked about at the very beginning, which was the, you know, the plan, the go bags of each individual resident. Well, it's that go bag, it's that plan that's really, you know, the government's plan. It's the government's, you know, it's no different than the individual. I have to have a plan for the individual. I have to have a plan for the government too.
Indeed, I guess that's basically just like what you said, a government plan on a smaller scale. Those binders that Sydney had, those are, you know, for the county. That would look like a binder that Krista was talking about with all the photocopies of your important information in it.
Exactly.
Who you call, what you do. Same thing that you guys do, I see.
Yep.
It's all happening, folks, whether or not you know about it, but all these things are happening. So earlier, before we started on the program here, we talked a little bit about hazard mitigation and lessening the impact of a disaster. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, you know, one of the functions of our office in emergency service is to look at mitigating our hazards. And you know, one of the first key components of that is making sure you understand what your vulnerabilities are and what your hazards are. And you know, that's important not only for emergency management to think about, or public works, or government leadership, but also for each individual. And it's real important to stay informed as to what are the hazards in your community, what are the hazards where you live, and then what do you need to do to mitigate those hazards? Because, you know, it all begins with the individual. So where do I live, and do I need to be worried about flooding? Do I live in a floodplain? Do I need flood insurance because I live in a floodplain? Do I live in an area that's prone to wildland fire? And what do I need to do to mitigate that? Do I have defensible space around my home? Can I protect my home in a wildland fire? Am I in an area that's prone to earthquake? And what do I need to prepare in my home for that earthquake? And so we can go through all of those natural man-made hazards that could impact us. And then what do I do in my home to mitigate it? And then what's the responsibility of government? What do we do in terms of community planning to mitigate for those hazards? So, you know, we all play a step in hazard mitigation, but that's a big function of both local and state government. There's a place on the Cal EMA website, My Hazards, and actually if you go, you mentioned the Office of Emergency Services website. If you go there, there's an icon there. You just push for My Hazards, and it allows you to punch in your, you just put in your address, and it'll list all of the natural hazards in your neighborhood.
That makes it pretty easy instead of going down the list and saying, Okay, am I prepared, for a hurricane?
Right.
When really I don't know that I should be thinking about preparing for a hurricane because I'd likely be hit by a tsunami than a hurricane at this
Exactly.
juncture where we live here. So that kind of does it for you. And that's the California Emergency Management Services?
California Emergency Management Agency.
Okay, and their website will list for you the various types of disasters that you are at risk for if you put in your address.
And you can just link it also from our website as well.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of recap real quick what we've heard today, and that was a lot about personal preparedness. We heard about what you can do to how you can create an emergency kit, how you can make a plan, and how to stay informed. We also heard how the community works together. All the different agencies that we heard about come together, and there's plans for various types of activities like mass care and shelter, debris removal, transportation, volunteer, donations, etc. And so we heard about how these folks come together to make sure that we are all considered for the most part. And then we heard about how our county government leaders are prepared and how the first responders are all prepared and the various exercises and plans. There's an exercise on Friday, I heard you mention.
We actually have an exercise in the EOC, yeah.
Okay, and so again, that's the Emergency Operations Center.
Exactly.
And that one is probably not one that the public will be involved
No,
with?
the public one is October 20th.
That's right.
The Great Shakeout, yeah.
And I'm sure we can go on your website to hear more information. And again, that website is www.co.monterey.ca.us/OES. And let's see, before we wrap up here, I want to make sure to thank you, Sherrie, so much for being with us today. And thank my other guests, Ms. Krista Haney from the Monterey County Public Health Department, Public Health Bureau, and Sydney Reed from the Office of Emergency Services. I also want to thank our audience for being with us today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next Monday from 4 to 5. And I guess I should say that I'm Emily Sciolto from the Monterey County Health Department, and I've been your host today for the Your Health television program.